a request from the Ōrākei Local Board, represented here today by Member Troy Churton and Troy Elliott. You don't have to be called Troy to be elected at the Ōrākei Local Board, I don't think. There are some others.
Have to be bald. Helps to be
Right,
bald.
you have to... it's a 00 top, okay? Let's get to the serious side. Members, there's been an approach from the Ōrākei Local Board represented by the two Troys on integrated residential developments in the single house zone in Ōrākei, but through a lens of wider Auckland as well. And so I welcome the members who will make a presentation to us here today. Now, I've had a discussion with our Head of Planning, John Duguid, had a late discussion with Councillor Simpson. As you well know, we can't treat with giving any sort of firm direction other than a consideration of this by referring it to staff to have a look at it, and that's what the recommendation was being. And I think Councillor Simpson, you're going to move it, and Councillor Henderson, thank you. We'll move and second that, and then we'll hear from in your presentation now. Troy Churton, you're going to lead it?
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, that's a great start anyway. Thank you for that. Look, I just want to start by reminding everybody, or maybe refreshing, I'm sure I don't need to remind you, refreshing that the unitary plan has effectively reallocated what is a finite, scarce resource, and that is land. And it's effectively reallocated residential land in a way to enable greater infill housing to meet a whole range of government-led objectives in a way that we've never seen before. And as part of the way that that land has been zoned to enable that infill, there has been a small pocket or pockets of land across the whole region which have been left as or changed into single house zoning. And single house zoning as a very minority zone in the scheme of the greater intent for the unitary plan has a very clear purpose statement to it. And some would argue that single house zoning is critical for retaining amenity value as much as other types of value in any area, whether it's in our area of Ōrākei and on the slopes of the stereotyped blue chip Remuera, or whether it's on some areas of the Manukau, and there are some areas around Favona, Arthur Street, Onehunga. Region-wide, there is single house zoning pockets, and they're only small, and they're precious, and they're scarce, and they're deliberately left in the unitary plan because the unitary plan allows infill multi-unit development in a more permissive way across all the other zones. With that in mind, there is still, in my view, in our board's view, and in the views that we've had fed to us from people in Cockle Bay as a result of a recent planning decision, as well as the residents' associations in St Heliers and Remuera to date, a view that the integrated residential development prospect for a single house zone is completely contrary to the purpose of a single house zone. And I don't know if you've had the chance to see a memo that I circulated, but there's a statement in there that the definition of an integrated residential development generally, however it's applied, whatever zone, allows a developer to drive roughshod effectively over the purposes of the zone. So in a single house zone, it's potentially possible for somebody to amalgamate 2,000 square metres of land where perhaps 4 single units would have been expected under that zone and apply for a 71 unit residential development. And that's a fairly massive distinction from what a zone actually says. And the case that I've included extracts from, in my view, is one of the most robust and strongest written decisions that you could possibly wish for. Because and I've included some extracts at the back of the short memo that the proposal, the IRD proposal, is contrary to the objectives of the plan. The single house zone is clearly not identified as a zone where intensification is generally expected, and so on. And so the thrust of appearing before you today is to ask you to take action and direct planning staff to use the tools available, which is a plan change, in order to make sure that any party, developer, whatever, who approaches a single house zone piece of land wanting to dramatically do something dramatically different from the purpose of the zone, be required to meet a higher standard than you might expect for a normal restricted or discretionary activity. And that we understand that to squeeze 71 units to where perhaps 4 were intended is so significantly different from what the plan expects that it should be treated as a non-complying activity and nothing else. So this is not about trying to deny somebody applying for greater infill in a single house zone, whether it's in Remuera or Otara. This is simply about making sure that the integrity of the unitary plan zoning is maintained, and the way to do that is to kick the IRD back as suitable for other zones, but to make sure that if it's going to be attempted in a SHZ, that it's a non-complying activity anytime. Look at that, it was musical.
Troy Elliott, anything to add?
Absolutely not. Sorry, can't even turn it on at the moment. That's cool. Absolutely not. No, I'm fine with what he said.
Thank you, Troy. Yes. Councillor Simpson, did you have a question on this?
Troy's actually answered my question. I suppose, you know, I've read a bit of media around this, Troy, and it's come up as being a little bit NIMBYism in my backyard. Mm-hmm. So maybe just for clarification, can you just give, and I know you've touched on it, a little bit more context to the fact that this isn't just something that applies to Ōrākei, it actually applies across the region, and you have evidence that other areas are supporting you.
Yeah, so look at, I haven't brought the actual email trails of notes from people in the Cockle, whoever here represents the Cockle Bay, Howick area, people from you, so people from your area, Sharon, representatives from the St Heliers Resident Association and Remuera Resident Association as at the time that the board supported this submission. And the other residents' associations are not, it'll come. What is on record, though, which is kind of related to this, is that what your resolution, if it can be done with enough haste, is that the unitary plan tools available to manage this through the plan change and the use of the non-complying activity status. Because if you just step back and allow yourselves to be emotionally affected by something for a moment, say if you're in a single house zone in a street which has got single houses on 700 metre sites, and that's the fabric of the street, and then suddenly a 100 unit development on a couple of amalgamated sites is plonked in the middle of that. Apart from being really concerned about the impact of that on your single house zone street, you don't have any opportunity to have a say because the RMA has taken away the notification rights for residential developments of that nature. So the only tool left for us as governors, as decent planning people, is to require developers looking to create that effect in a zone which doesn't have that effect as a purpose to make them go through a non-complying activity status regime.
Thank you. Troy. Councillor Walker, please.
Thanks for fronting up, Troy. So I'm certainly familiar with the Cockle Bay issue. I've read all the material, the independent hearing commissioners and the like. And I'll just go to a couple of questions. First off, quite obviously, we've got the prospect of a plan change because this could happen anywhere. But the other issue I just want to address is that, if I recall, the planner's report actually recommended that this development go ahead. Okay? So conceivably, we could have another approach from another developer anywhere in Auckland, and we might have another planner's report recommending that something go ahead. And the only check and balance we might have is a call, as happened in this instance, from the independent commissioners. So my question is, what do we have to do internally in terms of the advice that officers are receiving around these sorts of issues?
Yep. It's more a question for maybe our Chief of Strategy rather than Troy.
Well,
It was a question to the organisation. So can I just ask Chief of Strategy to respond to probably the submission here today and the direction that we're showing in the B identified in red?
Thank you. Great, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Troy. And look, it's helpful to get this feedback. And so this is not necessarily a new issue. And it's one that there's a number of these kinds of things where there's been some concern raised, whether it's from planners or communities. And we are looking at a package of these, and we do want to bring them back to this committee early next year. We'll be able to provide advice and actually do some analysis around that. There are some, technical planning issues that we will give advice around, discretionary versus non-complying, and and all of these things. So it's great. We agree it needs to be looked at. We would like to do that, but we'd like to bring you a more rounded view of a number of these kinds of things, and then talk you through those.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand what the officer is saying. I guess my concern is, as I said, any developer anywhere in Auckland could come at us right now, that is today, and would we experience the same situation? So I'm putting that question. What confidence do we have in terms of our guidance advice that we're giving to our planners or the like around this issue? Because it goes to single house zone, it goes to heritage, it goes to a whole range of issues that are threatened at this point.
Through the Chair, it is always a case-by-case assessment, so sometimes there might be heritage.
We've got a problem because of precedent. So
Thank you. Look, it's more of a comment, and I appreciate that, and the motion is moved and seconded, so you're free to comment. And look, we hear your points.
Yeah.
And we will progress this work. We will do it with other work to isolate it. It's a big task to cherry pick one item at the moment, Troy. So we need to investigate this. We will do that very early in the new year. And we will honour the resolution to become the B once it's passed. And look, I'll take some other questions. I've got Member Henare, Councillor Newman, Councillor Cashmore, Councillor Stewart and Councillor Watson.
Oh, kia ora. So what you want is what the West has already got? or the south has already got, or how does that work? Or is it what you're wanting is a change just for that area?
No, Tell, no.
Okay,
The,
calm down. I'm just asking a question.
yeah, thanks to Councillor Tell.
I wish.
What, eh?
I'm not a councillor. I haven't raised
Member.
the level
Right,
yet.
haven't-
Maybe next time.
Let's get back on.
Now that Henderson's
We'll
out
go
there.
back on course.
No, this is, yeah, I mean, obviously, Troy and I represent Ōrākei, but this is something that we're putting out as regional, this is a regional issue, and it's got nothing to do with socioeconomics, perceived blue chip, white chip, brown chip, whatever, it's nothing to do with it. This is about the integrity of a zone for a piece of land, wherever the land is. And unfortunately, because of the definitions and the ability to have these things called integrated residential developments, you will get some planners who say, oh, that's one, and some who say that's not. And we all know in this room, the resource management game is one where money and experts can make a good case on just about anything if you allow it to. So the best and simplest tool is to ensure that an integrated residential development for a single house zone, where the purpose of that zone is so clear that any layperson can understand it, means that if somebody wants to come ahead and, like I said, put a 71 unit development in that zone, they have to do so and get the thing assessed as a non-complying activity.
Cool.
Simple.
Thank you.
It's a simple solution and it retains the integrity of the plan.
Councillor Newman, please.
I'm not sure. So my question for you is, I too share concerns about the integrated residential developments classification. I want to deal with that. But I also have concern about the application of the single house zone. I can defend a single house zone to defend an urban ngāhere, a coastal area, an area subject to inundation, and I can make the exception for Cockle Bay given that it is so poorly served by public transport. I couldn't make any argument to defend a single house zone in Ōrākei beyond those things. So how about we address the integrated residential development classification, particularly in areas mixed housing, suburban and greater, and the quid pro quo being that we actually remove the single house zone for areas that where we're not defending the urban ngāhere, where we're not in the coastal area, where we're not subject to inundation. In other words, why don't we upzone in Ōrākei and do away with the integrated residential development classification? That way we've basically offset everything. Would that be to your satisfaction?
It's, I'm always grateful for your challenging questions, Councillor Daniel. I think you just got to come back to the fact that the way that the entire land resource of our region was allocated and zoned reflected an allocation based on wall armies of advice to enable infill housing to meet objectives. And single house zones, wherever they're situated, whether they're in my ward or any other ward which isn't suffering inundation and the things you mentioned, reflect other values than just the need for intensification.
But your local board area is very market attractive and a very good destination for investment for the purpose of intensification. So beyond defending the coastline, beyond defending the urban ngāhere and the fact that there is quite a lot of public transport investment in some of the corridors adjacent, isn't it a good place to have some of this development, notwithstanding the problems with the integrated residential development classification, which I can see are becoming a problem in terms of the way in which a developer applies?
Well, you know, I could say that, you know, the Arthur Street area in Onehunga is, you know, close to a motorway, close to an airport and suitable for the same sort of thing. Again, this is an issue bigger than Ōrākei. Did you? Yeah. I think where you appear to me to be taking this issue is into a greater refresh of all zoning, rather, which is not in my view, Daniel, that the issue here. The issue here is about why do we have single house zoning, and if we do, which we do, how do we uphold the integrity of it? There isn't much of it.
Thank you. I think that's answered. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. I just wondered, were you aware that the development at Sandsford Road, the council's consenting officers had sent information out to the Howick Local Board to request whether they wanted it to be publicly notified or limited notification, and unfortunately it appears that the email hadn't been opened, and so the reporting officer decided that it would be limited notification. And in such an area where, for those of you that know Howick and Pakuranga and especially the Cockle Bay area, that's an area where we have a history of flooding and stormwater and inundation, and it's also just across the road, as you're probably aware, to two schools. That to have these 71 apartments put upon us when it had only been limited notification and should have been public notified. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of the background communications. I know that no, the short answer, no.
All right.
But I don't, it is what it is, and we've got a good decision anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Watson.
I was just going to speak very briefly to the recommendation. Okay.
Thank you. Look, I'll close the questions there because I think we need to progress this. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. And I'll just be very quick. And I think it's been a pretty compelling presentation today. I thank Troy for that. And I would say that these, what I would regard as perverse results, do go across the region. I can think of a number in my ward, and I think they do need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And I think, hopefully that timing up there does that, along with that wider package of other issues that might be before us. And just, and I don't know if that's the appropriate place or not, Mr. Chair, but I, certainly from my perspective, sitting through the unitary plan, one of the notions was certainly intensification, but was also affordability. And what I see in some of these more desirable areas is that sure, intensification, and in this case, this single house, so huge intensification takes place, but there is no contribution to affordability. It's just a whole lot more units, perhaps marginally less than the big single house or that was on there. So that notion that there is some sort of benefit to the community just doesn't exist. And in fact, quite the reverse, the amenity of some of these areas that we might not live in, but actually part of an attraction of Auckland. So I don't live in Oraki or Paratai Drive, but it's actually quite pleasant to go through there. And, I've done that all my life, as I know other Aucklanders do too. So while there's that, while there might be that, that kind of sense of, it's the not in my backyard type, I don't go along with that. And what I would like to see in that analysis too is that important component of affordability. That was, one of the drivers for part of this intensification as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson, did you need to say anything as a mover?
I'm happy. I've moved it. I'm very happy with what the Deputy said.
Thank you. Closing it out, Councillor Walker, please.
Just want to speak to this further to my question. So I have a particular concern around B, and that is around the timing. So we're talking about present preliminary findings. So I'll repeat that. Present preliminary findings at a planning committee workshop in the first half of 2020. I'll repeat that, the first half of 2020. So what I want to speak to is, this is a substantial issue. the areas of single house residential in Auckland are not small. They are across many areas of Auckland. We have development forces lined up where you have developers actively purchasing multiple single house residential properties, and they're looking at what council is doing. So we need to action this now. It's relatively simple. I would have thought that the officers would have been on to this already and that we could have something brought to us quickly. Otherwise, we could be defending multiple planning cases in court, and this could be costing us a very, very, very substantial amount of money. And in addition to that, we will have huge numbers of people in Auckland in single house residential areas very, very concerned that they could have a massive development going up next door to them, blocking out their view, impacting on their amenity, impacting on their heritage, impacting on inundation, stormwater issues, and those issues are prevalent here in Howick at the site. So we need to be doing something here. So there's the immediate issue around a plan change, and there's the immediate issue around some form of an internal advice note to planning officers, because it's the advice given by planning officers and their report that effectively got us into this situation. So this is it. I would address this issue then to the mover and seconder. Are the mover and seconder happy with this delay? That is the first half of 2020, and that this is just going to be preliminary findings. So is it going to be a year or so, or a couple of years before we deal with this? So I'm just addressing that issue to the mover and seconder.
If I can come in there, please, because we need to move this along. We've actually been on the item for half an hour. It's an important item. And I'm sensing that Troy are appreciative of the B that's in front of us and the direction. Yes, we don't do instant planning here, I'm sorry, gentlemen. We've got to do the investigations first.
So
Look,
I'll put an amendment, Mr. Chair.
We could end up
yeah, I'll leave
in
it to you
a
guys.
precarious situation.
You could.
So look, I think the question to the mover and seconder, I don't think it needs to be answered because the mover and the seconder have backed the B. That is the answer.
You could make the word preliminary final.
It could be in the first month.
And we will look at this, as it says, in the first half, and we come back in February. So I'm going to put
I'd like to move an amendment, Mr. Chair.
No, you've spoken. You need to do that at the outset. You know the standing orders.
Perhaps someone else might move an amendment.
I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.